Hey, good morning, Impact. Hope you're ready for our second morning. So you've probably heard somebody say something like, that may be true for you, but not true for me. Have you ever heard somebody say, live your truth, live your truth? Given the confusion about truth, I figured we'd start with a verse you know. It's one of my favorites where Jesus says in John 14:6, I'm one of the ways, one of the truths, and one possible life. Did Jesus say that? Do you know there's in fact at least 100 verses in the New Testament which makes it clear that Jesus is the only way to get to God? 100 verses. Jesus seemed to think that truth and what you believe about it is pretty important. So you ever really stopped and thought, why does truth matter? Why should I even care about truth? Well, I was given a talk on truth a number of years ago, and a student came up to me afterwards and said, hey, Sean, that was really interesting, but why does truth even matter? I said, well, do you want the true answer or the false answer? Now stop and think about that. If you ask why does truth matter without realizing it, what are you already assuming matters? Truth. It's inescapable. We all know that truth matters. In fact, the Apostle Paul put it this way. He said, with all the deception of wickedness for those who perish, because they did not receive the love of truth so as to be saved. You know what? I hate to say this, but I'm convinced most people love feeling good over truth. Most people love being right over truth. Most people love winning an argument and looking good over actually following what's true. The question is, are you different? Do you actually love truth? Because let me tell you something right now. If you love and follow truth, it's going to cost you something in your life, period. So why is truth important? Let's wrestle with that for a minute. Why is truth important? Well, for one reason, truth has consequences. Truth has consequences. My uncle's a pastor up in Massachusetts, and he was sharing a story with me about a cousin of mine who I never met, who was deaf, and he'd go walking on the train tracks every single morning out where they lived. Got up one morning, but it didn't occur to him that they would change the times that the trains came. So he believed that he was safe, believed he knew he could walk at a certain time, but they changed the times. And the train came from behind, he couldn't see it, couldn't hear the warning, it couldn't stop in time, and struck and killed my cousin because he had false information. Friends, truth has consequences, big and small. That's why Hosea, the minor prophet, said, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. If you don't have truth about your health, what you put in your body, consequences. If you don't have truth about your bank account and you spend money you don't have, consequences. Truth matters because truth has consequences. But there's a second reason why truth matters. And I actually want everybody where you're at, close your eyes. Close your eyes. And with your eyes closed, point the direction you think is north. With your eyes closed, point the direction, keep your eyes closed, you gotta choose. Point the direction you think is north. Now keep your hands pointed and open up your eyes and look around. Now I can tell you, these guys on this side are literally pointing right past each other. Now I actually have no sense of direction. I don't know what direction north is, but I can tell you it's not straight up. But look, here's the deal. If you want to know what direction north is, what do you need? A compass or the app on your smartphone, right? It's not that hard. Think about it. Truth is like a compass for life. If you want to head to Texas, which is obviously the opposite of north, you've got to have the right compass, how to tell you how to get there. See, if you have wrong information, there's consequences, but when we have right information, what does it do? It tells us what direction we should go in life. Truth helps us orient our lives regardless of how we feel. That's why truth is so important. So my mom is a boomer, so all the boomer comments would apply to my mom. Love her to death. But years ago, my mom got a new email account and decided to set it up herself. Yeah, some of you know where this is going. One of the first instructions said, close all the windows. I wish I were making this up because it's my own flesh and blood. My mom got up from her chair, walked around the house, and closed all the windows in the house. Now, some of you are giving me this look of you can't believe this and chuckling. Why? Because you know a computer has been designed to function a certain way. And when the instructions say close all the windows, it doesn't mean the windows in your house, right? It means something different. And when you're wrong about that, what happens? Frustration, confusion, embarrassment. You see, a computer like this is designed for a certain function, isn't it? There's a truth about it. And when I understand what the truth is, it's not a snowboard, it's not a basketball, it's certainly not a parachute. I know what it is and use it accordingly. In a sense, I'm set free. That's why Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. You see, Satan is the father of what? Satan's the father of lies. Jesus is the truth. Satan's whole strategy is to confuse and deceive you because lies bring slavery and because truth brings freedom. You ever notice the first thing we learn about God in the Bible is in the beginning, God what? God created. In the beginning, God created. We're told God is a creator before we're told God is love or just or merciful. Why? If something is created, like a computer, there's a purpose for it. We can only be free when we follow truth. So that's why I think one of the biggest lies all of us today, in particular your generation, are tempted to believe is about freedom. That freedom is doing whatever feels good as long as you decide it's true for you. That doesn't lead to freedom, that leads to slavery. Truth is orienting our lives based on what God says, whether you feel like it or not. So number one, truth has consequences. Number two, truth is like a compass. When we know what is true, we know how we should live. But third reason truth matters is because believing is not enough. What do you mean, Sean? You're asking, look, nothing is true because you believe it. You realize that, right? You can have your own beliefs, but you cannot have your own truth. You can have your own beliefs, but you cannot have your own truth. Don't believe me? You know how many times I believed I was 6'8" and in the NBA? I'm only 6'7" on this stage at best. Look, I believe there's $1 million in my wallet. It doesn't matter how much I believe that. Even if it was there, my great state of California would probably take most of it anyways in taxes. Nothing is true because you believe it. But because beliefs have consequences and because what we believe about truth brings freedom, we better get our beliefs right. Now, one thing we haven't done, we've been talking about truth, is I haven't actually defined for you what we mean by truth. So I won't spend the time to do this, but if I went around, I wonder how many of you could actually define what is meant by truth. I'm going to give you a simple statement. I want you to write this down. I think it's going to help you to have clarity on this. Here's what we mean by truth. It's called the correspondence theory of truth. Sounds fancy. But basically, truth is when a statement or a belief corresponds or matches up with reality. So if you have a belief and the world is the way you described it, then your belief is what? It's true. If it doesn't correspond to reality, your belief is what? It's false. That's it. Truth is when a belief matches up with reality. So if I told you I drove here from Southern California and it only took me 12 hours because I drove in my new red Lamborghini. And you go walking outside and you see me valet this car, my statement just might be what? Might be true. Now, if you walk down there and I valet this car, my statement would be what? False. Why? Because I said it was red, in reality it's yellow. Now, if you walk outside and see the kind of car I really drive, which is this, why are you laughing? I had an 8th grader when I was giving this talk, he goes, ah, ha, ha, you drive a Ford. I was like, what do you drive? My statement would be really false because that's not close to a Lamborghini. You see, all truth is when you have an idea, when you have a belief, if the world is the way you describe it, your belief is true. So it probably is no secret by now, looking at my shirt, that I like superheroes. And I've even tried to teach this to my kids. I'll say, kids, there's a word on the bottom, and then there's an object. If you have a correspondence, you have truth. So that's Wolverine, that is Batman, and that is Spider-Man. Truth is when a belief matches up with reality. So when something is not true, it fails to match. Is that smoke? No, I'm just kidding. What'd you do when I said that? You turned back and you looked. Don't worry, since there is no smoke, my statement was what? False. If there actually were smoke, for whatever reason, my statement would be what? True. You see how this works, don't you? You have a belief, you have an idea, and we see if the world is the way we've described it to be. If so, true. If not, false. You're probably sitting there going, Sean, now that I think about it, this is really obvious. And here's the deal. It is obvious. You can't not use truth this way. Now, you can't turn to the Bible, and the Bible won't give you this kind of definition. But the Bible assumes this view of truth, doesn't it? By the way, what's the 8th commandment? Thou shalt not. No, that's steal. Sorry, I set you up. The 9th commandment is thou shalt not what? Lie. What is a lie? An intentional misrepresentation of the truth. That's what a lie is. So you can't have a lie if you don't have this understanding of truth. So the Bible assumes this view of truth. It's inescapable. Look, everybody uses this kind of truth. But when the topic shifts to moral values, or the topic shifts to things like religion, people will change what they mean by truth. Let me explain. So somebody tell me, I'm curious, what would you say is the best flavor of ice cream? Vanilla, chocolate, cookie dough, I heard, mint chip. Okay, all right, good answers. Let me save us some time. I have not heard the correct answer yet. No, shh, let me save you some time. The best flavor of ice cream is chocolate peanut butter, hands down. Now, by a show of hands, who says that statement is true? Let me see your hands. Okay, how many of you say that statement is false? Okay, wait a minute here, I'm confused. So how can the statement, chocolate peanut butter is the best, ice cream is the best, be true for me, but not be true for some of you? And the answer is, we're talking about something we call a subjective claim. See, subjective claims are personal, and they're private, and they depend on the individual that believes them. What's the key word within subjective, by the way? Subject, good, the person. So when it comes to something like, say, ice cream flavor, because it's a matter of preference, whatever you think is the best, you could say, is true for you because you are the subject that believes it. So subjective claims are internal preferences, all right? When you think of subjective, I want you to think of ice cream. Now, what if I said this? What if I said chocolate peanut butter ice cream controls diabetes? Usually I get an amen. Clearly there's no Baptists here. Maybe one or two have stuck in, undercover. Now, that's a different kind of claim, isn't it? In fact, if you have diabetes, you're like, whoa, 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 time out. You better get this right because my life is at stake here. To say that chocolate peanut butter ice cream controls diabetes, this isn't a preference subjective claim, is it? This is now not a claim about my feelings. This is a claim about the world in itself, independent of what I feel about it. This is what we would call an objective claim, which is about the external world, independent of how we feel. What's the key word within objective, by the way? Object, good. So one is the subject, which is your internal feelings. The other is the object, which is the world in itself that exists independently of how I feel about it. So if I imagine I have a big scoop of ice cream here and I said, this is delicious. Is that really about the ice cream? Or is that about my experience of the ice cream? It's kind of about my experience, right? But if I say this ice cream weighs, 15 grams, what's that about? That's about the ice cream, not my experience of it. So when you think of objective claims, I want you to think of insulin, because insulin actually helps control diabetes. This is about the real world. Now, I'm going to ask all of you to participate here with me in just a moment, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to throw up on the screen a statement. If it is a subjective statement, I want you to shout out, ice cream. If it's an objective statement, I want you to shout out, insulin. Okay, so every answer, ice cream or insulin. Now listen very carefully. I'm not asking if these claims are true or false. I'm simply asking, what kind of claim is it? If it's a subjective claim, shout out. If it's an objective claim, shout out. Okay, good. All right, let's give it a shot. Coke tastes better than Pepsi. Okay, good. That's a preference claim. Even if you don't like either, this is a subjective claim. All right? Diet Coke has fewer calories than regular Coke. Okay, good. Now this is about the object, the soda itself, and a property that it allegedly has. Good. 2 + 2 = 4. Okay, good. I have never had a single person shout out ice cream for this one, although they're trying to change it in California, just for the record. Now, this is about what? This is about the objective world. By the way, numbers aren't physical, are they? So this tells us things can be objective, even if they're not physical. I think you're right. How about this one? Hawaii is the most beautiful vacation spot on earth. Okay, good. We all know it's Southern California. No, I'm kidding. That is a subjective claim. Although, listen very carefully, the claim a rose is beautiful is an objective claim. If you don't think a rose is beautiful, you are just as wrong as if you think 2 + 2 = 5. I am dead serious. But I digress. I'm dead serious. But let's keep going. Ice cream or insulin? George Washington was the first president of the United States. Okay, good. Now, in what discipline or class would we study this? Okay, history. So you couldn't see this claim like you could allegedly see smoke in the back. This is something in the past, but we all know things in the past either happened or they didn't, and they're mind-independent realities, so they're objective claims. I think you all got that one right. Good. How about this one? Action movies are more enjoyable than romances. Okay, most of you got it. This is ice cream claim. I know there's some guys who are like, that is an insulin claim. Can I tell you something? I've been married 22 years. Don't die on that hill. Don't die on that hill. Just saying. And I love action movies. All right. How about this one? Ice cream or insulin? Sean McDowell can bench press 300 pounds. Insulin! How many say ice cream? How many say insulin? How many of you say after the last election you will never vote again? No, I'm just kidding. Okay, listen very carefully. Do you know the answer to that question? No, you don't. Shh. Do you have to know the answer to know whether it's ice cream or insulin? No, you don't. I'm not asking you if that's true or false. I'm asking you, what kind of claim is it? Is that a preference claim that can be true for you but not true for you? Or is that a claim about the objective, mind-independent world? You understand now, don't you? Now, we could test this, right? We could throw up some 45s. I could stretch a little bit because I'm getting older, and I could see if I could bench press. And the answer is either yes or the answer is no. There is an objective truth about that claim, even if you don't know if it's true or false. So for example, if I said there's 50 quadrillion, zillion atoms in the universe, either that is true or false. That's an objective claim, even though we will never know if it's true or false. Are you with me? So the claim George Washington spat in a puddle on a certain day, we might never be able to know if that is true or false, but either it's true or either it's false. Now, some of you want to know the answer to that, don't you? Yeah. Here's the deal. I just did a YouTube short a couple weeks ago. You're going to have to go watch it and figure it out for yourself if you think that's true or false. All right, that was a good hook. I know you guys can appreciate that, who are our social media guys. Actually, the answer is I used to care before I turned 40. Now I just want to stay alive. All right. Ice cream or insulin? Earth is the center of the solar system. Okay, good. Now, this is not a historical claim. It's what? It's a scientific claim. Good. That also happens to be false. So can there be false objective claims? Of course. If I said George Washington was the second president of the United States, that'd be an objective claim that's false. If I said 2 + 2 = 5, that's an objective claim, but it's false. Now, so far you've told me mathematical claims and historical claims and scientific claims are objective like insulin, not ice cream. I want everybody to vote on this one. Ice cream or insulin, abortion is wrong. Ooh, we got a mix. Who says ice cream? Let me see your hands. Put them up high. You got to vote. You got 1 or 2. Who says insulin? There's a lot of you that did not vote on this one. Now, please listen very carefully. This is not a scientific claim, although science might help us with this question. This is a moral claim. Are moral claims like insulin, in which there's an objective right and wrong, or are moral claims like ice cream, in which you all have your own preference, but there's no standard by which we can make judgments of others? Do you understand the question? Where do moral claims fit? I was having a conversation a number of years ago with a fellow about abortion, and he said, if you don't like abortion, don't have one. I said, sorry to point out the obvious, but I can't. I actually think sarcasm is a spiritual gift. I think it's the 6th love language, just for the record. Now, notice what he's saying. If you don't like abortion, don't have one. In other words, if you don't like chicken, order the fish. If you don't like coffee, get tea. If you don't like abortion, don't have one, as if the question of the morality of abortion is entirely a matter of preference, like ice cream flavor. So I asked him a question. I said, sir, I'm curious. Are you against slavery? Looked at me like I was crazy. He said, of course. I said, then if you don't like slavery, don't own a slave. Let me ask you a question. Are we against slavery because we don't like it? Yeah, I just don't prefer it. No. We're against slavery because we know it's objectively wrong to own and abuse another human being based on something secondary like skin color. That is objectively wrong. Friends, whenever somebody tells me they think morality is like ice cream, I never believe them. No one is actually a relativist. You know how I know this? Number one, Romans chapter 2 says people even without the law, so even people without, say, the Bible, still know that there's right and wrong. Why? Because it's written on their hearts. So even atheists, by the way, atheists can know right from wrong because they're made in the image of God. Atheists can be moral because God has made us moral beings. But what atheism cannot do is give us an objective standard of right and wrong without God. My dad said to me, he goes, son, you know what someone believes about morality? Not by what people say, not by what they do, but by how they want to be treated. In other words, people will break a promise to you, but the moment you break a promise to them, they will cry foul. I tell my students, I teach a bio, but I still teach one high school class at a local Christian school. I say, if someone tells you there's no such thing as right and wrong, cut in front of them in line. Especially that breakfast line this morning. Try it. Someone tells you there's no such thing as right and wrong, just walk and make us, actually now everybody's going to do it, so don't try it. If you went and you cut in front of somebody, they would get this feeling inside that's like, that is not right, because you know that fairness and justice is real. Look, a number of years ago, some of my students came to me because in the public school across town, when I was teaching full-time at a private Christian high school, had this big atheist event, and 100 students showed up to hear about atheism and why there's no God. My students came in, they're like, Sean, there's this movement, or actually they didn't call me Sean. They're like, Mr. McDowell, there's this movement. What do we do? And I said, well, what do you guys want to do? We came up with the idea that we would host a debate in our church between 3 of their atheist agnostic students and 3 of my students. And they accepted. Our church was packed, standing room only. We probably broke all the fire codes. We debated the historical Jesus, evolution versus intelligent design, and morality. One of my students started off and she said this. She said, we all know there's a right and wrong. We expect people to live with justice and fairness in mind. That's because there's a moral law. And a moral law is best explained by a moral law giver. Right and wrong points to the existence of God. One of their students walked up and said, there's no moral law. It's all a matter of preference. You have your code, live according to it. We have our beliefs, live according to it. There's no means by which you can judge anybody else, and sits down. But then it was time for the closing statements. The student who just said there's no moral law walked to the podium in our church and looked out at a mostly Christian audience. You know what he did? He said, you know what? You all are a bunch of bigots. You're homophobic and you're hateful. Shame on you. And he sat down. You notice anything odd about that? There's no standard of right and wrong. It's all subjective. But you hateful, bigoted, and intolerant Christians have broken every moral law. Shame on you. You can't have it both ways, friends, because he's made in the image of God. He couldn't help but make moral judgments. Why am I bringing this up? The question, abortion is wrong, is a moral claim, isn't it? We all know there's a moral law. By the way, side note, what is the heart of the question about abortion? I would imagine, say, Sunday afternoon, you go home, you're tired from being an impact all weekend, you notice the house is messy, so you decide, you know what, I'm going to do the dishes to help out my parents. Now, for some of you, this is going to take a lot of imagination. So you go home, and you're doing the dishes, and maybe your younger brother or sister comes behind you and says, hey, bro, hey, sis, can I kill this? Now, before you say yes or no, what would you ask? What is it? If you turn around as a cockroach, you'd be like, hurry up. You turn around as a little puppy, you'd be like, hey, why do you want to harm that puppy? That's kind of messed up. If you turn around and your little brother or sister's like, hey, I pulled this infant out of a carriage down the street, can I kill this? You'd be like, whoa, no, that's a human being. And you need counseling, even though you're only 5. Why does this matter? Think about it. How we treat something depends upon what it is. That's why you should treat a human being differently than a cockroach. The question in abortion is, what is the unborn? If it's just a bunch of cells, no justification is necessary. If it's a member of the human race, then no justification is adequate. Friends, either the unborn is human or it's not. Either we have the moral duty to protect human life or we don't. That is not a subjective claim. That is a question of objective reality. Moral claims are like insulin, not like ice cream, and we all know it, don't we? In fact, if all moral claims are like ice cream, could you ever judge anybody for doing anything wrong? No. You couldn't say slavery's wrong. You couldn't say sexism is wrong. You couldn't say racism is wrong if morality is like ice cream. But we know there's objective moral truths, don't we? We know it. All right, come back with me. Ice cream and insulin, two more. Jesus was a carpenter. Insulin, good. How about this one? Jesus died in 80-30. Insulin. Now, we're actually not certain the year he died in. Some argue 29, some argue 30, some argue 33. But that's still an insulin claim about objective reality that our beliefs don't change. Last one. Jesus resurrected as proof he is divine. Most of you said insulin. Okay, good. Now, this is a historical claim, but it's also a religious claim, isn't it? That Jesus is God in human flesh. Friends, either that is true or that is false. Jesus resurrected as proof that he is divine. Now, let me bring this home to make sure we're very clear. I hope you all realize that nobody dies and goes to hell just because they don't believe in Jesus. You realize that, right? Nobody dies and goes to hell just because they don't believe in Jesus. People die and go to the awful place the Bible describes as hell because of a moral rebellion against their Creator, because of a moral virus we call sin. And to say that Buddha or Krishna or Mohammed can forgive my sins is like saying chocolate peanut butter ice cream controls diabetes. It doesn't work in the objective, real world. Have you ever honestly thought, why is Jesus the only way? Why is Jesus the only way to get to God? Friends, please let me see your eyes and hear me. Jesus is the only way to get to God because he is the only one who fixed the problem that separates us from God. If your car is out of gas, it does no good to rotate the tires, get new spark plugs, and drop $5,000 on a new transmission. You got to identify the problem and fix it. The problem is sin. Jesus said it's the human heart that is in rebellion against God. The problem is sin. And what does sin do? Sin separates us from a holy God. Because God is just, he can't look at our sins, our selfishness, our greed, our immorality, our lust, our pride. Because God is just, he can't look at it and say, you know what, it's no big deal. Then he wouldn't be just. Anymore as a parent of my kids, if they're beating each other up, I'm like, it's no big deal, move on. I'm like, no, you got to say you're sorry and make this relationship right. God cannot look at our sin and ignore it. But because he loves us so much, Jesus, who's God in human flesh, steps into human race and says, I will take your sin for you and pay the debt if you are simply humble enough to accept the free gift of grace that I offer to you. Jesus is the only way because he's the only one who fixed the problem that separates us from God. And the problem, friends, is sin. It's sin. And you know what? If you reflect for a moment, you know it, don't you? If I had a tweet set up to your heart that everything you felt or thought towards somebody else was tweeted out, that every single one of us would feel ashamed at what's said, wouldn't we? Because we know there's something broken in our hearts. That's what the Bible calls sin. And that's why the Bible says you have to be born again, and I will give you a new heart. Jesus is the only way because he's the only one who fixed the problem of what separates us from God. But what makes Christianity unique is it's not just based on your feelings, but it's based on a faith rooted in fact. So think about this for a second. If you were there at the empty tomb, guess what you would have seen? You could have actually walked to the empty tomb, seen a stone rolled away, ducked inside, smelled the musty scent of an empty tomb, and seen the loincloth of Jesus sitting there. If you're at the cross, you could have reached out and touched the cross and got a splinter on your hand and maybe felt the trickle of warm blood coming down from the body of Jesus. If you're there with Thomas, he said, I will not believe unless I can see and touch with my eyes and with my hand. You could have reached out and touched the spear wounds in the side of Jesus. What makes Christianity unique is it invites investigation and points to the facts as this being objectively true. You see, you can believe in Jesus. You cannot believe in Jesus. But the claims of Christ are either true or they're false. They are not true for you, but not true for you. Either Jesus got reality right or Jesus got it wrong. And either you believe or you don't. That's why 1 Corinthians 15 says, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is worthless. You're still in your sins. And we're going to look at that tonight. Now, before we take questions, in just a few moments, Nick's going to come up here. We're going to take some of your questions live. But here's some objections I hear that might help for you. You ever heard somebody say, well, there is no truth? There's no truth. Clearly, if there's no truth, Jesus can't be the truth. Now, hopefully, because all of you are smart, and I've met a number of you, you see something very obvious with this. Namely, if there is no truth, then my question is that statement true? So if someone says to you there's no truth, ask them a simple question. Say, is it true that there's no truth? If they say yes, then you say, okay, I want to make sure I understand. So it's true that there's no truth? If they say no, then why should I bother to believe something if you don't think it's true? Friends, this is like sawing off the branch that you're standing on. It's like somebody saying to you, you should be more tolerant of views different than your own. My question is my view different than yours? Yes. Then if you should be tolerant of views different than your own, and my view is different than yours, then why are you so intolerant of my views? You ever had somebody say something like this? Well, you shouldn't force your morals on somebody else. Here's my question. Is that your morality? Yes. Then if we shouldn't force our morals on others, and that's your morality, then why are you trying to force it on me? Or it's like when somebody says, well, you shouldn't judge. My question is that your judgment? If we shouldn't judge, then why are you making a judgment that I shouldn't judge? Why do you get a pass and I don't? Friends, we know there's such a thing as truth. The question is, what is true? How about this one? But sincerity is more important than truth. You ever heard that? Are you really going to tell somebody who sincerely believes something that they're wrong? Look, here's the reality. People can be sincerely wrong. And actually, you can be insincerely right. Sincerity has nothing to do with whether something is true or false. How about this one? Isn't it arrogant to think that you are right? What just happened here? Now the person has shifted from the issue to what? To attack you. Now, rather than dealing with your claim, they're calling you arrogant. Now, if someone says this to you and you're a Christian, what you should say is, hey, if I've been arrogant, I apologize. Humility is a Christian virtue. I'm sorry if I've acted arrogantly towards you. But please help me understand why my alleged arrogance means that my argument is false. What does my character have to do with whether that is true or false? You can be arrogant and right, you can be arrogant and wrong. You can be humble and right, you can be humble and wrong. How about this one? But it feels true to me. Have you heard this one? As long as your generation is told, as long as you feel something is true for you. Now, I want to show you a video here in a second. A friend of mine went to the University of Washington. This is during some of the bathroom gender debates that are continuing on to this day. And I want you to notice something. All he does is ask college students questions. He doesn't argue. He doesn't preach at them. He simply asks them questions. Watch carefully, and let's see where this goes. But pay attention to how many times when people answer a question, they say something like, well, it just feels this way to me.
There's been a lot of talk about identity lately, but how far does it go? And is it possible to be wrong? We went to the University of Washington to find out.
Are you aware of the debate happening in Washington State around the ability to access bathrooms, locker rooms, spas based on gender identity and gender expression?
I think people should be able to have access to the facility.
I think bathrooms could and potentially should be gender neutral because there doesn't need to be a classification for differences.
I think people definitely should have the ability to go into whichever locker room they want.
I feel like at least public universities should do their best to accommodate for those who do not have a specific gender identity.
You know, whether you identify as male or female and whether your sex at birth is matching to that, you should be able to utilize the resources.
So if I told you that I was a woman, what would your response be?
Good for you. Okay. Like, yeah.
Nice to meet you.
I'd be like, what? Really?
I don't have a problem with it.
I'd ask you how you came to that conclusion.
If I told you that I was Chinese, what would your response be?
I mean, I might be a little surprised, but I would say, good for you. Like, yeah, be who you are.
I would maybe think you had some Chinese ancestor.
I would ask you how you similarly came to that conclusion and why you came to that conclusion.
I would have a lot of questions just because on the outside I would assume that you're a white man.
If I told you that I was 7 years old, what would your response be?
I wouldn't believe that immediately.
I probably wouldn't believe it, but I mean, it wouldn't really bother me that much to go out of my way and tell you, no, you're wrong. I'd just be like, oh, okay, he wants to say he's 7 years old.
If you feel 7 at heart, then then so be it. Yeah, good for you.
So if I wanted to enroll in a first grade class, do you think I should be allowed to?
Probably not, I guess. I mean, unless you haven't completed first grade up to this point and for some reason need to do that now.
If that's where you feel like mentally you should be, then I feel like there are communities that would accept you for that.
I would say so long as you're not hindering society and you're not causing harm to other people, I feel like that should be an okay thing.
If I told you I'm 6 feet 5 inches, what would you say?
That I would question.
Why?
Because you're not. No, I don't think you're 6'5".
If you truly believed you're 6'5", I don't think it's harmful. I think it's fine if you believe that. It doesn't matter to me if you think you're taller than you are.
So you'd be willing to tell me I'm wrong?
I wouldn't tell you you're wrong.
No, but I say that I don't think that you are.
I feel like that's not my place as like another human to say someone is wrong or to draw lines or boundaries.
No, I mean, I wouldn't just go like, oh, you're wrong, like that's wrong to believe in it. Because I mean, again, it doesn't really bother me what you want to think about your height or anything.
So I can be a Chinese woman.
You sure.
But I can't be a 6'5" Chinese woman.
Yes.
Okay, stop right there. Stop right there. Did you hear what she just said? Did you hear what she just said? Now, I'm assuming yes, but follow the reasoning. Notice what he did. He only asked questions. What would you say if I said that I was a woman? Most of them said, nice to meet you, great, good for you. Then he asked a similar question, what would you say if I was 7? What would you say if I said I was 6'5"? What would you say if I said I was Chinese? And then you notice the answers start to shift a little bit, don't they? At the heart of all of those questions is a common question. Is there an objective truth, and do our feelings trump reality? So if there's no objective truth and our feelings determine reality, then he could be a 6'5", 7-year-old Chinese woman. If feelings determine truth. If they don't, then he's not 7, he's not 6'5", he's not Chinese, and he's also not a woman. You can't have it both ways. Now, my point in showing this is not to make light of gender dysphoria. Please don't take it that way. I know there's many people genuinely wrestling with these issues, and as Christians, we must have compassion. But we must also realize that it's truth that sets us free. We cannot abandon the reality of truth. If you base your life entirely on how you feel, you will wreck your life. Last one before we do questions quickly is this: but all religions are true. Have you ever heard that? Hey, Jesus may be true for you, but Buddha is true for me, Muhammad is true for me. Can all religions be true? I made a simple chart, and I'll leave this up here for a minute if you want to write it down or take a picture if it's helpful. I wrote down all the top religions on the left: Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Their view of God. You know, most versions of Buddhism do not have a personal God. Hinduism, some would say one God in many forms, but millions of God. It's polytheistic. Jews, one God, Yahweh. Muslims, one God, Allah. Christians, one God, but 3 persons who are each divine. Now, could all of those 5 religions be false? Logically, sure. Maybe atheism got it right. But they can't possibly all be true. All religions could be false, but they can't possibly all be true. I had a chance to interview a non-Christian lesbian on my YouTube channel. I reached out to her and I said, hey, full disclosure, I'm a Christian professor. I'd be interested in just seeing if we can find some common ground and I can interview you about your story. She said, sure. So I interviewed her, and let's just say it was really fascinating. At one point, I said, hey, do you believe in God? She says, I think pretty much all religions teach the same thing. What do you think? I said, do you really want to know what I think? She said, yes. I said, I think on the surface, religions have common principles. Caring for your neighbor, the golden rule. But when you probe down to the core, religions differ on what it means to be human, what's wrong with the world, the existence of God, and the nature of the afterlife. They disagree on such fundamental basics that it's not possible that all religions are true. She goes, oh, that makes sense, and we moved on. Friends, Jesus didn't say he's one way and one truth. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. And do you know what no one means in Greek? It means no one. Nobody gets eternal life apart from through Jesus. I had a proud dad moment last night. My son called me, and he's 18 years old. He's at a gap year program. He's going to Biola next year, and he goes, Dad, this guy I work with, I had a chance to share my faith with him. And I was like, oh my gosh, this guy's 20 years older, sharing his faith with him. And one of the things he said to me is, he goes, Dad, I told him, I said, the most important question he needs to figure out in life is this question: who is Jesus? And you'll only understand this when you're a parent. Inside, I'm getting emotional thinking about it. I was like, oh my gosh, my son gets it. The most important question Jesus said. is, who do you say that I am? And I want to prep your hearts and your minds, because tonight we're going to look at the evidence for the resurrection. Even though Jesus lived basically 1 to 3 years public ministry, that was all his ministry was, died in his 30s. He wrote no books himself. He had no military power, no government power, probably traveled 200 miles. He has changed more lives than anybody in world history. The most important question is not what your parents say, not what your youth pastor says, but who do you believe that Jesus is? Is he right that the heart is in rebellion against God and that we need to be born again? If so, that changes everything for our lives. Amen? We're going to look at that tonight. Nick, come on up here, buddy. I know we've got some questions that are pouring in. Here's a stool for you. Obviously more than we can take, but let's dive in and cover as many as we can before the break.
All right, so I had a chance to go through a lot of these, and there's still more coming in here, so I'm going to try to get to as many as I can. But, from last night, you, during your atheist part, you said there's no evidence for the human soul, and a lot of people want to know if there is any evidence for that.
Okay, that's a big question. It's going to take me a little bit longer. Let me just give you 2 quick evidences. Okay, one piece of evidence is this, is if there was no soul, then everything true about me can be explained in physical terms, right? Because if there's no soul, I'm purely a physical thing. That would mean there's no difference between the brain and the mind, or the body and the soul, right? Now, if I want to show that the mind and the brain or the body and soul are different, I need to show something true of the brain that's not true of the mind. If so, they're distinct. So if I said to you, I am Spider-Man, all you have to do to show that this is false is one difference between me and between Spider-Man. Okay, that's all it takes. So if I asked you to explain the brain physically, what would you say? It has a certain weight, it has a certain color, it has a certain physical location, it has a certain texture, because your brain is physical. But if I asked you to describe your mind, you wouldn't describe it in physical terms, would you? You'd say, well, your mind has beliefs. Your mind has thoughts. Your mind has ideas which are not physical. What does this tell us? Your brain is not identical to your mind. Now, if you say, well, I don't buy that argument, then you are giving a belief and an idea which can't be explained physically, which only makes sense if you actually have a mind and ideas are real. So one way to know that your brain and your mind, your body and soul are distinct and the soul is real is that there's different properties that apply to both. Good luck describing a belief in physical terms. How much does a belief weigh? What color is a thought? It's a category fallacy. Second argument, very quickly. I think one good argument for the soul are near-death experiences. Now, I don't mean just any near-death experience you see on YouTube. And yes, you can laugh based on my comment yesterday about watching YouTube. I mean documented, careful studies of people whose hearts stopped beating, their brain waves ended, they're resuscitated back to life, and they have information you simply could not have gathered in a purely physical state. So these are carefully documented. For example, a lady, if I remember correctly, in her mid-30s, had a cardiac arrest, rushed to a hospital, medically flatlines. Comes back and she says, I left my body and I saw outside on the 4th-story ledge of the hospital a men's size 10 blue left tennis shoe with a smudge mark over the pinky. They went up there and they found the exact shoe. So either she framed the whole thing and induced a cardiac arrest, which seems ridiculous to me, or this shows that when her body stopped functioning, the soul continued. There's a story of a woman named Pam Reynolds. who had an aneurysm deep in her brain, and they took her into a surgery room. Her eyes were covered. She had earmuffs on, and they had drained the blood from her brain to go in, snip it, and then close it up quickly. During the procedure, she said, I popped out of my body and I watched the whole thing, and she describes in detail the conversation, the tools, and the dialogue that happened, and the doctors say, this is impossible. Yes, it's impossible physically, but if the soul is distinct from the body, then this is real. Think of the soul like in Spider-Man in Infinity War, when Doctor Strange is like, boom, and what happens? The soul like comes out in a sense, the immaterial self, that's what the soul is. We have instances where the body's not functioning, and this person comes back and gives information they could not have known, which tells me that you're not just a body, the soul is real. That's two quick arguments, but I think there's very powerful evidence that you are not just a body, that you actually are a soul that survives death.
All right. Do you believe in evolution?
So anytime someone asks you a question, you have to ask, what do you mean by evolution? Evolution can mean at least 5 different things. It can mean change in time. So we've seen the evolution of Marvel films since the X-Men in the early 2000s, right? You see evolution in the Bible. You see change over time. Some animals are created on a different day. You can see the evolution in the Corvette. Change over time. By that definition, all of you have evolved since you've walked in here this morning because your hair has grown a little bit or you have lost some cells and digested food. You've changed over time. That's not controversial. Another idea of controversial is change within a kind. All right? So Darwin gave the evidence of these finches that seemed different on different islands and said, evolution. I go, yeah, that's evolution, but it started a finch and it ended a finch. It's horizontal changes within a kind. Another kind of evolution is change across kinds. This is where it starts to get controversial. But even there, you could say change across kinds, that's a random blind process, or change across kinds that God guided. I'm not avoiding the question. I'm trying to give you tools to think more carefully about an issue like this. Here's what I think. If there is any change over time, it must be a designer that caused it, because the probability of this happening through a blind process is just so remote, it would take intelligence if it even happened. But do I believe in the neo-Darwinian story? No, I don't embrace it.
All right. Well, this kind of falls right into another thing that you were chatting about last night, and that's, can you just address the similarities between humans and chimps since we share so much?
That's a great question. So humans and chimps share morphological similarity, meaning our bodily structures, more than, say, a cat or obviously a banana, which, by the way, I think actually has 60% DNA similarity, if I'm not mistaken. So if humans and chimps have such similarity, there's 2 explanations that can account for this. One is that we share a common ancestor and we evolved, hence similarities. The other is we have a common designer who made both. So why is your iPad similar to your iPhone? Well, those similarities are due to a common creator. So when we look at the similarities between humans and chimps, we have 2, at least in principle, equal explanations that can account for it. So those similarities are consistent with evolution, but they're also consistent with there being a common creator. So the similarities between chimps and between human beings doesn't prove anything within itself. We still need to explain where those similarities came from. But what's more interesting to me are the dissimilarities between humans and chimps. Radical morphological, brainwave, relationships, bodily structure, opposable thumbs, these huge differences. Can a blind evolutionary process get us from a chimp to a human being? I'm not convinced.
You would be able to bench 300 pounds if you were, though. All right. Switching gears a little bit. This person wants to know if people are genetically wired to be in the LGBTQ community.
Okay, so tomorrow morning I'm going to talk about sexuality, and we'll take Q&A on gender, LGBTQ, all of these. I'm happy to tackle them. But let me take this one since it came up. The APA would say, and I agree with them, we don't know why some people have same-sex attraction. It could be different reasons for different people. It's probably some combination of nature and nurture. Now, the interesting question is, should it surprise us as Christians that some people have same-sex attraction? My answer is not at all. Not whatsoever. Why? Because the Bible tells us when Adam and Eve sinned, creation itself was rocked because of it. So in a sense, all of us have desires that don't line up with how God wants us to live. So my friend Christopher Yuan, who is a same-sex attracted single Christian, actually came out of atheism. He was a huge drug dealer, came to Jesus in prison. Amazing story. He said, the question, it doesn't matter where, the question is not, why does somebody have same-sex attraction? Or the question is not, why is somebody born this way? The question is, will you be born again, is the way he phrases it. So all of us have sinful desires. All of us have broken attractions. And the question is, what are we going to do with those? So that's not unique to LGBTQ people. If you hear me saying that, you have misheard my entire response. One of the things the church does sometimes is say, well, there's those LGBTQ people, they're sinners out there, but we're not. And I'm like, hello. If you're saying that, you are so clouded by your own sin and pride, you can't even see it. You're worse than anybody else, whatever community that may be. That's a quick answer.
Okay, there is lots of questions that were similar to this, but when talking to someone who might be an atheist or just doesn't believe in Jesus yet, what is a way that you think that you could give convincing arguments or proof that maybe just go beyond being gentle and respectful?
Okay, let me just jump in right now. Look, here's the deal. Before you start giving arguments and proof, what you need to find out is why that person really is an atheist. People can be atheists for very different reasons. I have a friend who was raised in an atheist family and he just seemed to accept what his parents taught him. I have people experience hurt at the church and were so broken and felt abused that they want nothing to do with God. I have other friends who are atheists who are like, I just don't believe it because of contradictions in the Bible or evolution or whatever it is. I'm not going to launch into giving evidences to somebody until I first understand, number one, what the heart of the issue is, and number two, that they're open to hear it. So if somebody's an atheist, you know what I would do is I would just befriend them, not just to convert them, but that's somebody made in God's image. Befriend that person, care for that person. And in the right time, in the right place, just say, hey, do you mind if I ask you some questions about what you believe? When you call yourself an atheist, what do you mean by atheist? When's the first time you described yourself as an atheist? Have you ever been to church? What would cause you to reconsider and change your mind? Do you ever have doubts about your atheist belief? Do you think there's any good evidence for God? Like, just listen and get to the heart of the issue. I had a young man I met one time at an event, and he started asking me all these questions. What about contradictions in the Bible? What about other religions? And I had this feeling that those were not the real questions, so I said, hey, I'm curious. I could be wrong about this, but my sense is these aren't your real questions and they're a smokescreen. I said, what's really going on? He goes, you're right. I graduated from high school, and I signed up to go to a fraternity in the fall. And I've left my faith because I just want to have fun for a season in my life. Now, I'm not saying that's true for all atheists, But if you launch into giving arguments to this guy, are you scratching where he really itches? No, his problem is he thinks Christianity's stealing all his fun, and real freedom is going out and living in what we would describe as sin. So I want to get to the question beneath the question, which only comes by loving somebody, listening to somebody, building a relationship with them, and when they're open, then you share Jesus with gentleness and with respect. 2 people can clap, that's fine. I do got to do this one. Sure. And then ask about the...
All right. This is last night during your encounter, you said became an atheist at the age of 15. And then I think the question along with this is, I think you can go either way. And I like it. How could you make such a huge decision at the age of 15 when dealing with Jesus?
So here's the deal. I was role-playing, right? But there was an article of a bunch of atheists. This was in The Atlantic almost a decade ago. And they interviewed skeptics on college campuses. And you know when they said they started to have doubts? 14 years old. 14 years old. I think people start to ask these questions at 11, 12, and 13 years old. So whether my character should have or not is beside the point. And let me tell you, if you have doubts right now, can I tell you, that's okay. That's good. You can believe, but also have doubts. This might surprise you, but I have doubts sometimes about what I believe. I don't have it all figured out. I'm a Christian because I think it's true, and I really believe that. But sometimes I'm like, am I crazy? I believe this dude actually walked out of a tomb after being crucified. Am I nuts? Like, if you don't ever actually think that, I don't know that you've taken your faith really seriously. I'm like, dude, I believe a donkey freaking talked in the book of Numbers. That's a part of your faith, and that's okay. So if you have questions, don't push them down. If somebody tells you you shouldn't have questions, shame on them. Email me, and I'll find someone to help you with your questions. Because Christianity is okay with questions because it's actually true. Your questions are welcome. Please bring your questions to the table. And I talk to a lot of former Christians. You know what they say? Let's say, I was told not to doubt. Doubt was sinful. One guy told me when I had doubts, my youth pastor told me to sleep on my Bible and that would fix it. I wish I was making that up. Friends, Jesus said, love God with your heart and with your soul and with your minds. Jude says, have mercy on those who doubt. If you don't have questions today in our world in which 1 million people have a voice, then I don't think you've taken your faith seriously. The question is not, do you have questions? The question is, what do you do with them? That's what motivates my entire life. That's why I have a YouTube channel. I just posted a video yesterday on the evidence for the discovery of the lost city of Sodom. It is so interesting. I'm doing an interview next week with an exorcist who talks about exorcising demons out of people. And I'm telling you, the evidence for demons is compelling and it's powerful and it's real. That's why on Instagram, I do short videos, 1 minute, just answering the toughest questions that people send in to me. And I also do a lot of reaction videos to skeptics and atheists to try to help you think and respond with things. That's what my life is about. Look, the books are back there if it's helpful. I just can't urge you enough. Is God a human invention? 7 minutes a day, and you're working through evidence for the soul, how to think about evolution. How can God allow evil? How can God send somebody to hell? We have to be ready with answers for these. And I can't just give it to you from the stage. At some point, you've got to own it and think about it and start making this a part of your faith. I'm going to talk about this tomorrow, but chasing love on sex, love, and relationships. I talk about pornography. I talk about transgender, homosexuality, short, crisp chapters to help you on that. But the last thing that I didn't ask, that I forgot to do yesterday, is who won the shirt for the best question. This is actually, it's my latest book called A Rebel's Manifesto. And the best question was not asked during this session, it was asked after. A young man came up to me and he said, how can I better ask a question to show love to my atheist friends? That's exactly the right question. Levi, where are you, buddy? There you are. This is from my man Levi. Come on up here and get this. You take it away. We'll see you guys tonight.